Felly, ni'n symud o faes cysylltiedig cyhoeddus gyda Sian at Dafydd Jones o Bristol o Brystwyth. Mi o'n i'n gobeithio hefyd byddai Michelle Ryan wedi gallu cyflwyno gyda Dafydd yn anffodus. O'n i wedi gorfod gwibio yma am resymau personol, felly mae Dafydd yn ni gymryd at y ar ei ben hunan. Dafydd yn cysylltiedig â Bristol o Brystwyth, yn mynd ni o faes Sian, sydd wedi cyhoeddus yn mynd i draw faes Dolifen a gwaith Taliesin.
Clogio fyny. Fel oedd non yn esbonio ddechrau iawn, mae Michelle yn gwybod mae heddi drwg iawn gen i am hynny. A felly dwi wedi newid pethau chydig ar munud diwetha, so dwi'n mynd i'r peryglus i wneud, ond dwi'n mynd i real mynd ati newidiadau. Beth o'n i am wneud oherwydd bod Michelle yn rhan o'r cyflwyniad bod ni am wneud yn y Saesneg, ond dwi'n mynd i drio mynd nôl ymlaen rhwng y Saesneg i'r Cymraeg yn ysbryd Taliesin i ryw raddau, a trio esbonio cyflwyno prosiect newydd yn chwilio dwi am wneud. So, os dwi'n troi nôl i'r Saesneg, a byddai'n wneud hynny, please bydwch cymryd eich clustiau fod byddai'n mynd nôl i'r Cymraeg wedyn yn nawr ac yn ymlaen. Felly ni, bigodd fyny cwpl o themau sydd wedi bod yn y ddau gyflwyniad yn barod yn un o lleisiau. A trio lleoli y gyflwyniad yma yn y gynhadledd yma i'w raddau. Y thema o y broses o gyfieithu mewn modd celfyddyd, yn celfyddyd, yn beth pwysig bod yn meddwl wedi y cwmni teledu Taliesin. A'r ffordd mae corfforaeth tebyg i cwmni teledu fel Taliesin yn ceisio cymryd i lle yn y byd gyhoeddus. Yn ei bod yna gysylltiadau rhwng beth ydw i'n gwneud ar ddau papur arbennig oedd o'n blaenau ni. Iawn, felly, fe ddechrau gyda'r rhan Saesneg. This paper serves a number of purposes. Firstly, it is an introduction to a research project that seeks to analyse the history of the now defunct independent production company Taliesin, which operated from Cardiff between 1982 and 2002. Secondly, the paper will embody the spirit of that project by being a co-presented paper between myself, Dafydd Jones, at Bristol University, and Michelle Ryan at Trinity College here in Carmarthen. Of course, mae hynna dyna oedd na beth ni'n gobeithio. Thirdly, it is in some way a form of soft launch for the project Taliesin website, and hopefully a way of garnering opinion from you, the assembled audience, as to its aims and functions. So I'd be very much welcome any suggestions or criticisms or any comments about the aims or possible functionality of the project. I'm definitely still open to those things. Felly, oedd Michelle nawr yn mynd i siarad yn bwyty Taliesin y chwili. Felly yna ceisio cloriani y fath o beth yn cael bydde Michelle wedi sôn yn bwyty. Rhan pwysig yn atod o rhaglenni Taliesin oedd y syniad fod oedd gefn wrth gefn, rhai yn Saesneg a rhai yn Gymraeg, yn cael ei gyd cynnychu gyda'i gilydd. Oedd yn rhan o llais arbennig testunol oedd gan Taliesin yn y byd teledu yn y 80au a'r 90au. Ddim nhw oedd yn gwneud cwmni, oedd yn gwneud dramau yn arbennig gefn wrth gefn, ond nhw yn arloesol yn ceisio gwneud hynny, ac yn y ffordd yn ariannu gwneud hynny, byddewn ni hynny mewn munud. Rhan arall oedd yn ddiddorol dros ben ynglyn â Taliesin o ran lleisiau, oedd sut oedd strwythur y cwmni yn golygu bod pobl oedd yn gynhyrchwyr yn gallu droi yn olygyddion, bod pobl oedd yn olygyddion yn gallu droi yn gyfarwyddwyr, bod pobl camera yn gallu gwneud set, a bobl set yn gallu actio ac yn y blaen. Felly oedd ar y pryd, ar dechrau'r 80au, modd torri allan o strwythur eitha caeth oedd proffesiynol o fewn y duopoly oedd yn gorfodi pobl i fod yn un ochr yn y llall yn ochr cynnwys technegol, neu o fewn un swydd fel dyn camera yn enghraifft. Roedd hyn yn mynd ochr gyda dewis o testunau heriol a modd oedd y testunau yma'n cael ei trin gan Taliesin o ran gwleidyddiaeth ac o ran aesthetig. Felly mae Taliesin yn lais cri ac yn dod o amser pryd oedd yna nifer o lleisiau newydd yn dod i'r llwyth cyhoeddus trwy'r teledu. O lot fwy da Michelle i ddweud am hyn a da hi clipiau. Ond dwi'n credu y cwestiwn bydde hi wedi gorffen da oedd sut bydden ni'n mynd ati i ymgymryd ar fath gwmni a'r fath gorff o waith a'r fath llais heddiw mewn ffordd academig. So I'll go on to the project then, the project itself. It was a few years ago that I understood from Taliesin's ex-chairperson Colin Thomas that the company's tape and paper archive have been donated to the National Library of Wales in Aberystwyth. Excuse me, sorry, actually, it's a typo there, it's got a large typo, Freudian typo, I think. I was in the middle of my PhD on the development of history programs at the time, but I noted its existence and made a promise to myself that I would pursue it at a later date. My PhD had used official policy documentation, television listings, textual analysis of key programs and interviews with key producers and so on, and commissioners, to trace the development of history documentary on the UK terrestrial television between 1982 and 2002. So it was sort of a cognate area. However, after successfully defending it, the words of my Tilton examiner Kevin Williams still rang in my ears. He had commented that one thing to consider in the future was how the testimonies of individuals in the creative industries could be cross-referenced effectively to circumvent the empirical problems associated with oral history as a method of research. Whilst my PhD was mostly historical analysis, drawing on a framework of critical political economy and media policy, the Taliesin project would be situated in the realm of production studies, whose key concerns can be outlined in general as follows. The effects of proprietorial intervention on media content, issues of ownership concentration, so typically those kinds of discourses around Murdoch and whether he changes what's on the front of his newspapers or not, he obviously does. The alienation of the media worker, both in terms of the cost of their labour and the motivations of creative agents, issues of creative worker self-realisation. Do workers in a large company know how much power they have? Do they have any autonomy? And also, to what extent people give up on maybe material gain because of a perceived emotional or a psychological gain by being a creative person. And then the hierarchies present in media production organisation routines, how the routines of production limit and shape what is made and shown. So these are kind of traditional concerns of production studies. Wanting to do this is one thing, but how to do it is quite another. As Mayer et al. Indicated in 2009, in their edited collection suitably entitled Production Studies, going down this path requires a close eye on methodology. And I will read it out, but obviously this quote shows that what we're trying to do is we're trying to turn the lamp around, as it were, and have a look at how media producers and symbol creators produce what they produce. But also by doing that, how do we actually talk to those producers in a way that we can sort of, to some extent, systematize, formalize, and stabilize the information that we get from those interrogations or those discussions, dialogues. Yeah, excuse me a second. In a previous life, I was an interactive TV designer with the pioneering production company Victoria Real. I say pioneering, they always said pioneering, so I had to say pioneering as well. We all had to say pioneering. In the early days of interactive TV, when broadband was still a far away promise, I was involved in efforts to conceive of ways in which narratives seen on TV could be made more interactive. It was then I thought the idea of an online Avid project, if anybody's familiar with the Avid editing system that's the standard for much TV and film production, would be an interesting application, especially for documentaries. In such a media object, the user would be able to assemble their own narrative from the bins of material provided, in addition to being able to see several different cuts of the programme. Years later, this idea seemed to fit with Kevin Williams' exhortation, Meyer et al.'s warning, and the changing research landscape that encourage practice of research and methods of networking knowledge, and the potentially multimedia nature of any project on Taliesin. In addition, while conducting my research into the history documentary production community, I came face to face with the oft-mentioned gap between academia and industry. Structural reasons for the gap were plainly obvious. Plainly obvious, the differing languages in play, for start off, just the terminology in play. The often bitter legacy of the Frankfurt School's condemnation of the cultural industry. Sort of a dark cloud hanging over any kind of any attempt to talk about something that's off the technical path sometimes. On the other hand, the arrogance of the academy's deluded self-positioning outside considerations of cultural production, as if we don't make stuff for audiences as well. On the other hand, there was also a hefty quantity of goodwill. Those who I approached, usually those who had spent a lifetime in television production, were generous with their time, and the honesty about their working practices would put many university administrators to shame. This led me to believe that if pitched in a particular way, the community producers that now constitute Taliesin's corporate afterlife might respond to a different form of research and dissemination, one in which they were nearer the centre, if not at the very heart. The mixture of material potentially available through Taliesin could be viewed: video material, production paperwork, company paperwork, interviews, and the greater potential for working on the web, thanks to cheaper and faster technologies, presented an opportunity for creating an object that could be both research mechanism and research output. And I apologise for that last part of that sentence. I just realised that my mind is being slightly colonised by the incoming economy of the higher education sector. However, in such a potentially methodologically complex project, how was a suitable bridge to be built between academic and industry frames of reference that still allowed for a complex system of cross-referencing between different accounts of the same events and across a broad range of events that constituted Taliesin's history? So for this project, Simon Coppell's 3 stages of production analysis, which break down the object production studies analysis, provided that simple bridge. I mean, I felt there were other models that had 4 or 5 points, or 6 or 7 points, but Coppell's was 3, which I quite liked, because there's 3 colours on the Taliesin logo, and all kinds of reasons that probably aren't proper. But first, at the micro level, cultural milieu interactions of producers situated within norm-governed and hierarchical production settings, relationships entered into with technologies, etc. For a project Taliesin, this would look at the minute editorial decisions made simultaneously on several levels during the production of a specific program. So, in other words, read case study, production case study, a kind of quite well-established and well-understood form of research and dissemination. On the other hand, the meso level, or the meso level, of impinging organisational cultures. For Project Taliesin, I think this would mean examining the running of the cooperative. It was a cooperative company which adds spice to the whole, and some large amount of substance, to be fair, so let's be clear, to the analysis of Taliesin, including the relationship between administration and production functions. And then, of course, the macro contexts surrounding the company. For Project Taliesin, this would mean the company is changing relationships with broadcasters, and to some extent those broadcasters changing relationships with their audiences and production arms, and also those broadcasters changing legal responsibilities. By using this simple and clear structure as a starting point, company and career histories could be remembered and cross-examined. Technical and editorial regimes of representation could be placed into historical context. And all this could be done with a richness of detail that would take research beyond the useful but surface focus of traditional television production history to answer the following questions. I wanted to ask what impact Taliesin had had on media in Wales. It was a company that a lot of people passed through in the 20 years of Taliesin's existence, from 1982 to 2002. A few famous names, Michael Winterbottom, for example, worked there at one point. And I wanted to see where those people had gone afterwards, where they'd come from, and whether Taliesin sort of did still exist in some kind of conceptual way afterwards. What was the effect of Taliesin having lived through a turbulent and transformatory time in British broadcasting? So we're talking about the 80s and 90s, which saw an enormous change from 3 channels to hundreds of channels, etc. So what was the effect of that period of turbulence on this one company, or it's sort of a case study in a way of a company going through troubled waters. High desirable or even possible was the co-production model in media production during the period under question. And I'd extend that to today. As anything to learn from Taliesin. How did the production demands of the documentary, screen drama forms change over the period as a consequence of technological and industrial development? So Taliesin not only is a way of looking at Welsh media, it's not a way of looking at Taliesin itself and what would happen to a company like Taliesin in this environment, but it's also a way of charting changes to form as those decades go on, by looking at the minutiae of script changes and also at the actual logistics of getting things done. And lastly, what light does Taliesin's history throw on the present state of media production in Wales and the UK? To some extent, this last one is implicit in the position, in me doing this now. As we go into another, as we are immersed in another paradigm shift in media production and dissemination, as far as television is concerned, are there any lessons that could be learned from Taliesin, how Taliesin organised themselves, how they did things, and what went right as well as what went wrong? Okay, so at this point, Michelle would have come back in. So, yn credu beth oedd Michelle wedi eisiau sôn am beth yma oedd grêt. Mae system copl yn eitha hawdd i ddeall, eitha hawdd i drafod, ond mae'r broblem mawr yn arbennig gyda'r categori y meso yn y canol. Mae modd ddisgrifio y macro, mae lot o bobl wedi. Mae modd ddisgrifio y micro, mae'r draddodiad hir o edrych ar gynrychiadau a edrych ar esthetig a sut mae'r esthetig yn wedi dod mas o awduron er enghraifft. Ond sut yn unig, sut yn union ni o ddiffinio y lefel meso yma a'i edrych arno fe, a hwnnw yw'r lefel anodd yn credu. I ba raddau, er enghraifft, i ba raddau oedd Comisiynwyr cynnar Sianel 4 a Cymru a Channel 4 yn creu haen rhwng y macro a'r meso, a'r micro, i meso i hynny, ail feso, bron yn ffordd, anghenion diwydiannol cyfryngau, broses o gynhyrchu. I ba raddau oedd cwmni fel Taliesin ei hunain yn ymyrryd ac yn newid polisïau y Sianeli yma, a felly yn rhan o'r macro i ryw raddau, hefyd yn rhan o'r meso. Mae werth cofio'r pwynt yma, mae cwmni cydweithredol Taliesin a hyn oedd ffynhonnell eu steil nhw, a'i dewis o destunau gwleidyddol a heriol. Felly mae werth meddwl falle bod y ffin rhwng y meso a'r macro wedi symud dros yr amser yma. Fel falle bod Channel 4, Channel 4 yn wedig wedi fynd yn fwy o fwy corfforaethol. Y meso felly yw'r categori mwyaf hyblyg yn y system dadansoddol yma, a felly yn categori pwysig iawn i unrhyw dadansoddiad cynhyrchu yma. Okay, so I'll try and speed up, so I probably can about the website then. So how does the website work? So this is all about a website, basically. I have made a website, I've started making a website, it's almost finished, it's almost ready to launch, and then it will develop from that point on. Well, as I mentioned it earlier, it seems to make use of a number of different, seems to make sense to make use of a number of different types of material, each of which has its own story to tell, as well as assisting the cross-referencing and contextualization of each bit of material. So, first of all, we have interviews. Now, I'll try and show you an example. Okay, so first, interviews. So you see, this is the kind of the landing page of couples, 3 categories, a very, very quick bilingual explanation of the project, and then via a reasonably easy navigation system, please work, we come to interviews. A number of you may, they haven't all been uploaded, but I have an example that I made earlier in true fashion. This takes us to a transcript page with the recording, which I'm really not sure whether the sound will come over here. We don't have sound, do we?
To 2002, that's the kind of area I'm looking at. That's the period I'm looking at least. And I think the reason why I've picked that area is because it's not a period, it's a period where television changed quite drastically. And also it seems to be from a small sort of statistical sort of sampling that I've done, it seems to be a time in which history programming in terrestrial.
I go on a bit further, and then Colin does speak, honestly, I promise. So that's one set of information that materials that are going to be up here. The second set of information, sorry, I'm going to confuse you. So, firstly, the representations of interviews conducted with past members of Taliesin. All interviews are categorised as either interviews about crucial moments in Taliesin's history, i.e. its formation, interviews about production themes or genres, i.e. history documentary, interviews about careers, interviews about key programmes. Each category of interview shares a basic set of questions in order that interview material and similar categories can be compared, and that set of questions is loaded with, along with the interview. Differing perspectives on Taliesin's genesis, differing perspectives on the production of specific programmes can then be cross-referenced. These interviews range in method from semi-structured conversations to written or recorded soliloquies to formally edited textual interview transcripts. So the reason for this variety is because I want the voices of people that I'm talking to come through in the way that they would like to come through. I don't want to impose a structure on them, because I think learning from the lessons of my PhD that sometimes closed doors. The choice of manner which an interview is conducted and represented emerges as part of a discussion between myself and the interviewee. This flexibility and range is essential as one project's greater challenges to include material on individuals' emotional, political and psychological motivations in a way that does not lead to personal attack nor to accusations of defamation, which is actually quite important, because in a way what I'm doing here is laying bare the kind of the skeleton of a research project publicly, and that has some dangers, especially considering some interesting passages in Taliesin's corporate history. Taliesin is an interesting case study, partially because many of the tensions usually repressed by a more vertical organisational hierarchy were voiced in this organisation by its members at moments of individual and corporate crisis. This represents an opportunity for an examination of tensions in the industry of the period in question, but also presents dangers in terms of opening of old wounds. So, on to the second category, the production paperwork. The website was also include uploaded P-as-C documented program as completed documentation, which is a kind of file that tells you the history of the program's production, including budgets, schedules, cast list agreements with broadcaster scripts, contracts with performance, contracts with archives, and so forth. This documentation will have numerous potential functions. Firstly, they will act as an aid memoir for interviews. Secondly, they will act as a resource for researchers seeking to research this area and mode of production from a different standpoint, i.e. the change in nature of performer contracts, the change in nature of archive footage are both potentially instructive to the UK production studies generally. In addition, the personal papers of ex-members will be utilised, including minute meetings, programme development material. Confidentiality in the case of the interviews is of great importance, hence the cooperation of this project with the National Library of Wales in Aberystwyth in redacting commercially confidential, personally compromising information. So I can just give you an example of some paperwork, just more that you can see how it might operate. So if we go to the company page, and here is, oh, chocolate works, please. No! Okay, this is now installing, still installing. It's always a bit of a risk that one. It could be a wonderful moment of revelation or slightly disappointing. Yeah, okay, that's all right. Well, what should appear here is a PDF of Taliesin's Constitution of 1988, signed by the members and showing very clearly what the cooperative production company was to do differently to a normal production company that was built on ownership or shares. And underneath here is an all-important box for comments, where people can say, well, this was certainly the spirit, or certainly the intention, but the spirit was different, or the eventual reality was different. And this is a feature that one can access on all the pictures. Video material. Added to these two main ingredients would be video material in agreement with the surviving members of Taliesin and National Film and Sound Archive of Wales. Brief clips will be identified from programmes and will be included along with production paperwork to form production case studies, to give the all-important sort of third dimension, as it were, of the project, to actually see this material, which is extremely impossible to see in any other circumstance. I'll give you an example of how this might look. Again, hopefully this will work. If we go to productions, and then we go to the one example that's so far populated, extant YouTube copy of a drama series that Taliesin's last drama production, Eldra. Idea of how these different inputs can be experienced, not exactly simultaneously, but certainly within one sort of pathway through the website. What's key to this is the navigation. These materials are brought together by navigation that gives the user multiple points of entry to a cross-reference set of data. So you can enter by looking at events in the company's history, events in the macro, micro events, i.e. production programs. You can have a look at the video straight away, or you can go and have a look at a blog that's up there, which will be linked to these other materials, where I sort of give a running commentary, as it were, on how the research is going. So the production phases of this project, I'm coming to close now. Production phases of this project is, in the first phase, I'm going to be looking at origins. Discussions of the origins of the company, including interviews with, statements from its founder members, uploading the constitution, discussion of cooperative ideal material such as summary pages of the project, interviews, constitution documentation, early filmography, staff lists, etc. This stage is very almost complete, and can be viewed at your leisure. Well, not too far along. I'll try to get a way to send emails to those of you who might be interested. If you are interested, actually, maybe if you could leave that at the end, that would be easier. And then things will be added to it as the project goes on. Then the second phase, which is key programs, uploading the production paperwork of all the programs that have excellent production paperwork, around 100 programs. The interviewing of as many members as possible with regards to their careers and the place Taliesin occupied in their careers. Interviews concerning production of key programs, and the cross-referencing analysis of the information as it begins to take shape. The third phase will be a forum phase, where the site is made available for moderated comments from viewers, although actually there will be a certain amount of comments possible right from the beginning, and invited comments from a wide professional academic circle. This means a forum function on the site, but also, hopefully, a symposium at a later date. Just i gloi, i trio meddwl beth bydd y Shell yn gweud, i gloi y papur. A fi'n credu beth bydd e'n gweud yw, ynglyn â'r categori macro yma, fod defnyddio Taliesin fel enghraifft, yn ffordd da o edrych ar y categori mawr yma o macro a profi rhai o'r damcaniaethau un o newidiadau diwydiant teledu a ffilm yn Mhryden rhwng 1982 a 2002. Oedd sy'n angen gweud fod newidiadau anferthol wedi digwydd ar y pryd, a newidiadau anferthol tri sian, canoedd o sianeli, y duopoly i aml sianel, aml platfform, o gwasanaeth cyhoeddus i'r farchnad. Ond yn ogystal, bod y werth gofyn, oes gall prosiect Taliesin bwrw golwg ar ein sefyllfa ni heddiw. Gall model cydweithredol Taliesin, ei aesthetig, ei ffordd o weithio, falle gweithio heddiw. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Rwy'n dwi'n gofyn cwestiwn i David?
Thank you, David. Very interesting. Have you looked at, or will you look at, any comparable production contexts in the UK or anywhere else?
Either. Do you mean production context as in...
Or comparable to Taliesin itself?
As another production company, for example?
That operated cooperative models and so on.
I think in discussion with people and also in analysis of material, that will definitely crop up. For example, the workshop movement of the 80s is a really important context.
Yeah.
But I think for a couple of reasons I won't be looking in great detail. Number one, it's a lot of other stuff for somebody else to do. And also to some extent I think it's quite a job to keep the parameters quite clear so that people understand what it is and how to use it. But definitely I'll be referring to the context, and that's part of the purpose, definitely.
Falle pensa Taliesin oedd y Gwyn Williams. Faint o dystiolaeth maen nhw wedi gadw yn ôl a beth i syniadau fe am achos oedd hi'n ei moli fi?
Dwi ddim yn gwybod. That's a hollol honest i hynny. Os chi'n nabod nhw sy'n arall yn gwybod bod na ddeunydd sydd wedi adael ar ôl sy'n rhoi ôl eitha clir o sut mae'n effeithio Taliesin, bydde hynny oedd ddod yn nawr i fi. Fi'n credu bod yna lot o ddeunydd wedi sgwennu dros y blynyddoedd a rhaglen ni wedi wneud. A fi'n credu eto i ryw radd, mae hwnna'n gyd-destun pwysig iawn, ond mae'n sail prosiect cyfan ydyn ni hun ydyn ni, o fi'n siŵr falle bod hynna yn cael ei wneud gan rwy'n wedi cael ei wneud gan rwy'n, ond dwi'n yn gwybod i chi'n...
Na, wel, oedd priodi mewn i'w lyfrau, dwi'n meddwl, oedd e'n ac yn y blaen, oedd e'n gyd yn rhan o fudiad personol Gwyn.
Wel, fi'n credu bod mewn sgyrsiau gyda Colin Thomas er enghraifft, a Michelle hefyd, maen nhw yn cyfadde bod ac yn talu teimged i Gwyn, a bod yn rhan pwysig dros ben o Taliesin yn 80au a 90au cynnar, a bod ei farwolaeth wedi bod yn drist iawn iddyn nhw gyd personol, a hefyd i'r cwmni wedi bod yn reit bwysig, fi'n credu, fel troad, neu fe. Fi'n credu felly fydd na triniaeth i ryw raddau o pwysigrwydd Gwyn yn dod tro yn y prosiect, yn y cyd-destun yna.
Un beth o'n i'n meddwl gofyn ti sôn am y diwedd yna, ti'n ynglyn â'r perthnasau gwaith Taliesin i beth sydd wedi heddi. Wyt ti'n meddwl wedyn ni gofyn o'r Taliesin to pan ti'n edrych ar y tilyn dylledu y foment? Ti'n meddwl wedyn ni rwy'n metro fan ffynno?
Wel, fi'n credu, beth yn ddiddorol am Taliesin oedd bod pobl yn gallu newid safle o bod yn rhywun oedd yn cynhyrchu, dyn camera, Riot yn yr enghraifft, dyn camera ystegawdau a dawnus dros ben. A wedyn oedd yn ymuno â'r Taliesin, oedd rhai o syniadau fe yn mynd ger bron ac yn troi mewn i'r rhaglenni, neu oedd yn gallu creu set yn rhywbeth. A i ryw raddau fi'n credu bod Taliesin a cwmni eraill Taliesin wedi arwain ar y ffordd yn ffordd yna. Nawr ni mewn sefyllfa lle mae sgiliau pobl aml sgilio yn beth eitha sy'n eitha cyffredin yn ddiwydiant. Sgwni os mae os oes yna rhyw agwedd arall ar hanes Taliesin, gallai fod o ddefnydd nawr yn y sefyllfa i ni, a dwi'n credu mae'r dosbarthiad yn broblem mawr iawn lleisiau unigol Cymraeg, Cymreig, a engl Gymreig neu Cymraeg. A falle bod yna ffordd o greu cwmni sydd ddim yn un cwmni pathetic yma i chi fod yna o 9-5, modd i chi symud mewn a mas. A falle bod yr ysbryd yna yn fyw mewn cwmnioedd sydd yn bod hefyd. Beth ych chi'n meddwl?
O, dwi'n meddwl, falle bydd yr sesiwn, dwi'n meddwl mae Dr Rhys Jones yn cyfeirio fory a technoleg falle modd i ni edrych yn siwr mae modd i eisiau fel yna, gael i cyfleu lleisiau fel lle o ddifon ddiwolwg, bod rwy'n gen i cyfleu wneud y math o beth o tle sy'n gwneud yn trwy dyledu. Dan, drwy'n arall. Na, dwi'n diolch yn fawr iawn. Nawr te, mae'n groeso i di bod